So we're going to talk about chapter 3 today. Kids, read the online textbook, stay focused, get your work done. You guys can do it. Let's just take a little peek, see if there's anything else out there worth looking at. All right. So let's look at chapter 3 here. There's those ducks again. You caught a frog? All right, let's look at this frog real quick here.
No.
Here, can I get the frog on the camera or no?
Yep, he's probably not as scared of a camera, but he's scared of us.
Cool.
I caught him in that swamp. Little swamp area over there. And but I'm gonna put him in a little container. Put some land and some water.
Okay. All right. Well, buddy, I'm going to start lecturing a little bit, so I'm going to need to focus, okay, bud? All right. So let me lecture a little bit, and then we can play in a little bit to get lunch. All right. So, guys, let's see. Let's find a place to go here. All right. So, guys, chapter 3. All right. So, chapter 3. We're going to look at chapter 3 today. And let's see if we can get... Okay. Here's a good little screen grab where you can hit pause and see exactly what I'm doing here. And so chapter 3. All right. So remember, this is from the hard copy textbook. It is still very similar to the online textbook. It covers mostly the same stuff, but there are some little differences here and there. All right. So colonial diversity. The colonies are different right from the start. The colonies are different, based a lot on who settles them. For example, the northern colonies, also known as the New England colonies, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, they're very Puritan. There's less religious freedom in the north because the Puritans had been persecuted back in England. England in the 1500s, 1600s has a lot of religious persecution. That's why religious freedom's very important to America and its founding. But the sad fact of the matter is, the Puritans, when they come over, they're used to being persecuted themselves. So when they start their own colony, they don't want to become the minority again. So they make sure they stay the majority by persecuting, exiling, and chasing out other people from their colonies. And so basically... The northern... Hold on a second, buddy. Buddy, I'm going to have to...
Kill fish.
Okay. What do you got? Okay. Put it back in... Hey. Dan, put it back in the water. It has a right to live.
It's dead.
It's dead? All right. Are you sure? Okay. Buddy, let me lecture, okay? And so the northern colonies are very Puritan. And they have the strongest influence out of all the colonies of religion in the daily lives of its residents. Religion's important to all the colonies, but especially to the northern colonies. So you got to keep that in mind. Yeah, you got a little fish in your trap? Good, put it back so it can live. All right, and the northern colonies tend to have more family units than the southern colonies because their people oftentimes, the Puritans, just moving entire villages or little communities over to the New World, and they tend to have money and resources, and so they just pack up their belongings and move on over. The northern colonies are very city-based. They have town squares. The Puritans, they focus on community and helping out their Puritan neighbors. If a Puritan farmer breaks his leg, it's the obligation of all the other Puritan farmers to make sure that the farmer's fields get taken care of properly, and so forth. And so it's very community-based. They have town squares. And the northern colonies are going to be the first to basically have public education, public schools. And so when you look at like the public schools and stuff like that, it's Massachusetts and Connecticut that have the first public education for all. And it starts with religious background. It starts with the concept that everyone needs to be able to read the Bible, so we're going to teach reading and have like town schools, very community based in the North. And the North has a longer lifespans, which shows you that they're prospering, that they live to age 60. There's more upward mobility. Historians have looked back and found that there's more upward mobility in the North than there was in the South. A lot of people move to the South and they just stay poor agricultural workers. And people in the North oftentimes can rise up, start off poor. One big example of this is Benjamin Franklin himself. Starts out poor, works his way up, and becomes extremely wealthy. The Northeast is filled with small farms, merchants, skilled artisans. Ben Franklin, though, he was born in Boston, but he did move to Philadelphia, which is more of a middle colony. But you get the point. And the population growth is big in the northern colonies. It swells up. You have all these Puritans just moving in mass, and England's more than happy to get rid of them, especially after the English Civil War. And so you have all these Puritan groups just kind of moving out to the northern colonies. The middle colonies are very similar to the northern colonies. The middle colonies, these are New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. Sometimes people throw Maryland in there, but not usually. And these middle colonies are religiously diverse, unlike the northern colonies, and more so than the southern colonies. Although one exception, Rhode Island's fairly religiously diverse, despite being one of the New England colonies, because it's founded on religious freedom by Roger Williams. But you look at these middle colonies here, guys, and let's get a screenshot again there. But you look at this, and you got like Quakers founding Pennsylvania and Delaware, and so and they'll say, well, our way of looking at religion's right, but it's a sin for us to force you. And you get Presbyterians, you get Dutch Calvinists in New York, Mennonites. You have all sorts of different people, and because there's all sorts of different religions, no one really has a strong majority, and no one can really dominate the other. So it leads to the most religious freedom out of all the different colonies out there, and they have good population growth too. You look at the two biggest colonial cities are actually in the middle colonies: New York City out of New York, and Philadelphia out of Pennsylvania. And they're very similar to the northern colonies in some other ways. I just told you some differences with the religious diversity and more religious freedom. But they're very similar to the northern colonies. They have small farms and merchants and some growing industry, rudimentary industry for that era, but some growing industry. The southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, they tend to have some vast plantations. They have some small farms too, but let's get a screenshot of this. And basically, guys, the Anglican, that's the official Church of England, the Anglican religion, just dominates religious society. There are other types of religion too down south, but it's the Church of England in the colonial period that just dominates the south. And so you have more disease down there, shorter lifespans shorter by 20 years back then. So it's kind of a big deal back then in terms of kind of like what you expect to find in terms of people's lifespans and so forth. Large plantations, sprawling farms, slavery. Slavery exists in all of the original 13 states, and slavery is evil. However, slavery is far more ingrained, far bigger in the South than in the middle colonies or the northern colonies. The southern colonies' economy depends largely upon slave labor in a way that it doesn't in the middle colonies and northern colonies. And the South is younger and more male. In fact, they actually have to advertise to women to kind of move to the southern colonies. They actually advertise. There's all these middle-class farmers starting to happen. But the South also has the most rigid hierarchy to keep indentured servants down, to keep slaves in their place so they don't rebel. And, there's a cat. We have lots of cats. Quite a little bit of cats. Anytime there's a stray cat that needs to be adopted, my wife will do it. Um, but so that's kind of like what's going on there. Puritans. So this is the Northeast again. Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire. They come to the New World because they say they're going to create this example for everyone who stays behind in England. To be a city on a hill is this famous sermon by John Winthrop about how the whole world's going to watch them, and they're going to create this ideal society of brotherhood and helping out one another. And they're trying to avoid persecution back in England. But the problem is because they've been persecuted back in England, they basically start persecuting people here to retain their majority, to retain their stranglehold in society, so they don't become persecuted themselves. And their main goal is the Puritans, P-U-R-I, Puritan, P-U-R-I. They want to P-U-R-I, purify the Church of England. The Church of England's corrupt. They say it's too much like the Catholic Church. However, you can purify it. You can keep it. You don't need to burn it down. And so you can kind of keep it. The Puritans don't tolerate religious dissent. They don't tolerate different ideas. Roger Williams kicked out of Massachusetts. Anne Hutchinson kicked out of Massachusetts.
Guys, look what I caught.
For different religious ideas. What did you catch, bud? What is it? Oh, we got like a tadpole. Do you want to show him real quick before you put it back? I didn't get a good picture view of it. Do you want to show him just? Here we go. Cool. That's a big tadpole too.
It's going into my handle.
Okay. All right. Cool. Got a little.
Whoa.
All right. Let me focus on lecturing more, bud. Yeah, Dayton, I gotta focus though, okay? Let me get work done. Little baby one. Okay.
He has a tail.
All right, put him back in the water. All right, guys, and women, back then they were considered physically and mentally weaker than men. Obviously, that's absurd. In fact, today, statistically speaking, nationwide, women actually outperform men in high school grades, and women are more likely to get into college and graduate than men, is my understanding. So obviously this is absurd here, that women are mentally weaker, but that's a common Puritan thought. And so women are put into strict roles. Stay in the house, stay out of the political world. You're not supposed to speak in the church. Not supposed to make decisions with the church. But they're told though that you can sway men. You can sway your men. In fact, John Adams, who becomes the second president of the U.S., his wife once writes him kind of like asking for more rights for women when John Adams is helping form the creation of the new government. And he basically says no, but he says, well, we all know that women can already have a say because they can influence their husbands. They raise their sons to think like them and so forth, which is a ridiculous excuse to not give women their rights. But that's how a lot of the era sees it, especially in a place like colonial Massachusetts. The wilderness is portrayed as evil. The devil is portrayed as lurking in the unknown of the wilderness. Remember the whole concept of God kicked mankind out of the Garden of Eden and condemned him to toil and subdue and cultivate the earth. Well, the wilderness isn't cultivated. It's not subdued. Man hasn't toiled upon it per se. And so the devil's out there in the unknown woods, lurking the wilderness. And now this is obviously wrong and evil here. But a lot of people back then justify slavery because they say, look, Africa isn't developed the same way Europe is in terms of vast farms and the land being used. And North America isn't developed in terms of vast farms and the way land ought to be used. Therefore, and obviously this is wrong, But therefore, people justify, and you can never justify slavery, but therefore, in people's own minds back then, they justify slavery. Look, we're taking people who weren't subduing land like they were supposed to be doing, and then we're just making them do it over here, where it also hasn't been subdued. So we're actually making them productive people by instituting slavery, and therefore, this whole system is a good because it makes everything how it's supposed to be. Now, obviously, that's ridiculous, but that's what a lot of people are saying back then. Creole society. Ruling elites were born here in the Chesapeakes by the 1680s. Before this, the local authorities living here tended to be born in England, tended to be born in Europe. And now by the 1680s, remember Jamestown, the first permanent English colony, is 1607.
If you ever think you're interested in how much tadpoles I ever have, you can just...
Okay, thank you, buddy. And, but the fact of the Dayton, I have to focus, bud. But the fact of the matter is by the 1680s, the people who tend to be in charge here, the people who tend to be the top dogs, the people who tend to have the most sway are the people who are actually born here by the 1680s. So you can kind of, that's called the Creole society. They're English, but they're born here. And the honest truth is, a lot of English people kind of look down upon those born here, and so do the Spanish, and so do the French to some extent. They're kind of like less English, or a little bit less Spanish in a lot of regards. But guys, slavery. Remember, we'd already talked about how it starts out with indentured servants. But less indentured servants start to come to America. They find out that they're getting ripped off. They find out that they might die from disease or warfare with Native Americans. And the English economy recovers. And so you get less servants. So unfortunately, a lot of Europeans, including the English aren't the first to tap into the slave trade. The Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch all do this well before the English. But the fact of the matter is, the English start tapping into the slave trade too, to work plantations. Most of the slaves, in fact 96% of the slaves that come to the New World do not come to what is the United States. Most go to the West Indies, the islands, or Brazil to work on sugarcane plantations. Working on the sugarcane plantations, like a Portuguese or a Spanish sugarcane plantation, is the worst, because slaves are very cheap to get in Africa. You can trade very, very little with an African king to get African slaves, and sugar's so profitable that they literally work slaves to death on some of these sugarcane plantations because it's so cheap to get new slaves. They don't even have to care for the slaves' health and so much. 4% of the slaves that are brought to the New World are brought to British North America, essentially what would become the United States and a little bit of Canada. There's something called the triangular trade, and this is in your focus questions for this week. The triangular trade, guys. And so the triangular trade is the trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, North and South America. And so it's called the triangular trade. And not all the boats do this, but it's called the triangular trade because many of the boats go from Europe down to Africa, where they trade iron products, textiles, sometimes alcohol, rum, in Africa for things, or sometimes guns, not guns usually during the 1600s here, but to African kings for slaves. Then the Middle Passage, it's brought across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas, where they trade slaves for things like sugar, tobacco, other raw materials, and then they go back to Europe. And not all the boats are doing that triangle fashion, but many of them are doing that triangle, route. Europe down to Africa, over to the Americas, back to Europe, creates this triangle. And so it's called the triangular trade. Now some are just going straight lines and doing whatever. And some are actually even going, from New England down to like the Caribbean to give them things like wheat and so forth in exchange for sugar. But European textiles, manufactured goods, gold, etc. goes to Africa. Manufactured goods also go to the Americas. African slaves to the Americas. Also, this is the Middle Passage. They pack the slaves into these boats, cram packed. They're tied down. They can't.
Say hi to your little aquarium.
They can't move. Sometimes they'll bring them up on the top deck to get a little bit of exercise. But the fact of the matter is, many of them die on the way over. But they actually think about how evil slavery is. Slavery is so evil, they actually come up with basically a formula that if they pack them in there like sardines, most will get sick and some will die, and more would live if they gave them proper spacing. But you can still bring more people here, packing them in like sardines, despite the horrible living standards, being chained down, wallowing in your own filth and vomit from other slaves, strapped down. And the fact of the matter is, it's more profitable to bring them over like that in such an unhealthy way than it is to just treat them with any type of human dignity. But slavery isn't about human dignity, it's about profit. American rum, iron products, etc. oftentimes goes to Africa for slaves too. European tools, furniture, spice, etc. to the Americas. Most of the European spice are actually getting from Asia by route of going down the Cape of Good Hope, down South Africa there, and then back up. Mercantilism. We're going to skip this because I have a second video about mercantilism. So we're going to skip mercantilism. I'll hit it. You can see what we're talking about there. That will shorten this video up some. But you can see this is all mercantilism here. And I have a different video talking about that. So we'll just kind of hit pause here on that. And we'll just finish off this chapter right here. These three topics right here. And so, my tadpoles my son just caught there. Swimming around. All right. And so guys, bacon's, oh, you got some swans out there. Where are they? I just saw some swans. It's hard to get them in my screen here, but and anyways, all right, I better stop trying to find the swans. I think that's a swan right there. All right, too far out to see. All right. Okay. But guys, so here we go. Bacon's Rebellion. So guys, there's tensions over in Jamestown. Basically, the periphery, places out on the outside, not the heart of Jamestown, the town. It slowly expands outward. And so guys, think about this. So the city controls the politics. The city controls everything. And the city basically says, hey, we have this lucrative fur trade deal, and none of you people on the periphery can trade for furs. And the people on the periphery are upset about that. And the people in the periphery, they get attacked by some Native American groups, but not all Native American groups. And they're upset about that, and they ask for more help. And they don't feel like Jamestown's necessarily helping them. And so to make a long story short, the periphery, the places in the outskirts, near the wilderness, on the edges of the colony, those clouds are pretty today, are basically, they start attacking Native Americans. And not just the Native Americans that had been attacking them, but all Native Americans, even peaceful Native Americans that had been doing the fur trading with Jamestown. And so to make a long story short, Jamestown tells them to stop it. We can work out some type of solution. And it's not good enough for the periphery. And the people on the outskirts start attacking and trying to take over Jamestown itself. For a short time, they actually overrun Jamestown itself. And yeah, a bunch of tadpoles there, bud. 3 in 1. And so basically, Bacon is leading this rebellion of the periphery, the outskirts. And he gets sick and dies. But a lot of people see this as like, look at what's going on in America. People aren't afraid to rebel. There's a conflict between the established cities on the coast and the interior. And it has to be more than just not feeling safe from the Native Americans, because they also attack the peaceful ones. A lot of it's economic over that fur trade. And so that's Bacon's Rebellion. Now, guys, we had talked a little bit about King Philip's War last week, but here, I'll get it so you can hit pause here. But guys, King Philip's War. So the Wampanoag chief Metacomet, who's called King Philip because he's haughty, he's arrogant, like a French king, the English say. So basically, he's sick of English expansion, English encroachment on Native American lands. There had been lots of conflicts, lots of tensions building up for basically half a century up here in Massachusetts. Finally, he surprise attacks a bunch of Puritan villages and farms. Both sides get horrific. Both sides get, they attack villages, kill everyone in the village, burn the entire village down, burning farms down. It is eventually won by the English, but Native American resistance is basically broken for the most part in much of New England. There's still some Native American resistance in like northern Maine and parts of Maine, but there's a swan right there. But the fact of the matter is, it greatly weakens Native American resistance. And then the Salem witch trials. Many of the women who get accused are breaking gender norms of society. They're working outside of the home. They might speak up. Some of the women, I mean, there's also like this feud in the town between kind of like the haves and haves-nots, and it's kind of it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting to kind of see the gender norms. It's kind of interesting to see the gender norms and how they kind of play into it. A lot of the women accused had been a midwife, had been like a nurse, working outside the home. And it's actually kind of dumb to accuse them of witchcraft because you kind of need them for health reasons for your whole society. But one thing with the Salem witch trials, and we'll talk more about it this upcoming week in the live section, but one thing with the Salem witch trials is spectral evidence can't be used by itself to prove somebody's a witch, but spectral evidence can be used and is admissible in a court back then. Spectral evidence is essentially, I had a dream, and in my dream she came before me as a witch and as the devil, and therefore she's a witch. And that could be used. They'll look for what we might call skin tags today, and that was a sign of, quote, the devil's teat, and supposedly the devil would come and suckle on it at night. And one interesting theory about how this whole thing started is ergot poisoning. In wet years, it will grow on rye, and then people consume it, and it has properties like LSD, and it makes people go nuts and hallucinate, and they can have muscle convulsions and things like that. And if you look at the historical evidence, the rye that they would have been eating would have been wet, and the part of the town that has the most hallucinations actually would have been eating the most wet rye. And so it's quite possible that there is some science starting these hallucinations from ergot poisoning, which is causing muscle contortions and hallucinations amongst people. And if you don't have a good understanding of science, one of the easy things you can do is say, hey, witches did this to me. Another thing that science can explain, you look at some of the literal courtroom evidence against the witches, it looks like people are having sleep paralysis, where, if you kind of like, it's when you're into your REM sleep, your deep sleep, your mind kind of loses its ability to kind of like move, so you don't like wake yourself up or hurt yourself as you move around in your deep sleep. And sometimes you can like partially wake up or you regain consciousness, but your brain hasn't regained the ability to move. I've had sleep paralysis before, not very often, but I have had it. But you look at it, and a lot of people say, "Oh, I woke up and I couldn't move. A witch did it to me," and it looks like it's just sleep paralysis. So they might have been semi-telling the truth, but maybe embellished a bit or didn't understand, and then just kind of explained it how best they could explain it. And with their understanding of society back then, well, witches. So the fact of the matter is, guys, I hope you guys are doing well and stay out of trouble. All right, one quick thing, and then I'm gonna end this stuff.
I'm very talented.
Well, I didn't get that. You want to show them again? Wow, it's cool, bud. All right, kids, stay safe, be smart, study. All right.
I'm getting dizzy.
That's what happens when you go in circles. All right.